going on, you guys? Welcome back to another episode of Smell What Coop is Cooking. If you guys can't tell by the name of the channel, I'm a huge pro wrestling fan. And on today's episode, we're dipping back to the bookshelf, picking off another one of the many cookbooks I got in my collection, and we're going inside of JR's cookbook. Jim Ross, legendary wrestling announcer, released a cookbook some years ago. I think this was like over 20 years ago or something like that. I'm making a recipe out of it today. I've never made it before. We might jazz it up a little bit more by using some of JR's other ingredients, because on today's episode, we're making baby back ribs. But before I get started, the full recipe is going to be in the description as always. Now let's go.
Hey, what's going on, you guys? All right, this recipe for JR's barbecue ribs comes straight out of JR's cookbook. And since this is his recipe, I'm not going to be putting the full recipe in the description as usual, but you guys can follow along and see exactly how I do it here. This recipe is pretty simple, so I thought why not jazz it up with a few extra gimmicks, and we're going to be using a few more of JR's barbecue sauce products. So, the ingredients that I'm going to be using today for JR's baby back barbecue ribs are 1 tablespoon of onion powder, 1 tablespoon of garlic powder, I got a teaspoon of salt, and a teaspoon of freshly cracked black pepper. We've got some JR's all-purpose seasoning, JR's barbecue sauce, mesquite liquid smoke, and some of that good old JR's main event mustard. This recipe calls for a Williams smoker bag. Couldn't find one of those, so we're tagging out Williams smoker bag, and we're tagging in the Cameron smoker bag. And what would all these ingredients be if we didn't have a nice rack of ribs to put them on? And for this recipe, I'm using a nice rack of baby back ribs. And without further ado, let's get it. First things first, let's grab a couple paper towels and pat our ribs down dry. We want to get all that excess moisture off the surface of these ribs. Flip the rack over, pat the opposite side down dry. Grab yourself a knife, and we're going to remove this membrane off the back of this rack of ribs. It's going to make the ribs easier to eat and allow all these barbecue flavors to really saturate that meat. Finish patting it dry. Now let's move that rack of ribs over to the ring apron, grab a bowl, and let's start hooking up this rub. JR's recipe calls for half a teaspoon of onion powder and half a teaspoon of garlic powder, but you know we do it big over here at Smell What Coop is Cooking, so I'm using a full tablespoon of each. Beefing this one up with 2 tablespoons of JR's all-purpose seasoning, 1 teaspoon of salt, and 1 teaspoon of cracked black pepper. The recipe says I should use 5 drops of liquid smoke, and I'm going to use this liquid smoke elsewhere. You guys are going to see that soon. So let's mix up our rub until all those seasonings are well combined. In comes JR's main event mustard. I got about 2 tablespoons of that. This ingredient wasn't in the original recipe, but hey, I thought why not lock in all this seasoning with a nice mustard binder. And into this main event mustard, I am now going to add my 5 drops of liquid smoke. I've got some mesquite liquid smoke here because that's going to go with my mesquite smoker bag. Now that we got our ingredients all combined and ready to go, let's get it on these ribs. So I'm going to grab a rack, take my ribs, flip it with the back side facing me first. And let's go ahead and brush this down with about a tablespoon of this main event mustard mixed with the mesquite liquid smoke. Get all the edges of your ribs. Once you've got that coated with that mustard, let's go ahead and hit it with our rub. Make sure it's nice and coated on that mustard. This is going to help give us a nice bark on our ribs. Once our backside's done, let's go ahead and flip it over and get that nice meaty side of these baby back ribs. Let's go ahead and brush it down with this main event mustard. And now we'll hit this side with our delicious JR's barbecue rib rub. And now that we got our baby back ribs nicely coated, let's go ahead and pop this in the fridge. The recipe calls for 3 hours, so we're gonna let this sit in our fridge for 3 hours. And while that's hanging out in there, go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button, y'all. This recipe says I should be cooking these ribs entirely in this smoker bag. I don't know if I'm going to be doing it that way, but we are definitely going to be incorporating this into our recipe today. So let's go ahead and get our smoker bags opened up. I've personally never used these before, but the concept seems pretty simple. Let's go ahead and move these to the side, and when the moment is right, the Cameron smoker bag is gonna strike, y'all. Now, 3 hours have passed. Let's go ahead and pull this rack of ribs out of the fridge. You can see how that rub is nicely coated all over. It started to stick on really well with that main event mustard acting as our binder. It's gonna lock in all the flavors into this rack of rib and give us something that good old JR would be proud of. After seeing the size of that smoker bag, this rack of ribs isn't gonna fit inside of just one, so we're gonna cut it in half, and we're gonna put 1/2 rack of ribs in each bag. Before we go to the grill, let's go ahead and hit it with a little bit more of that barbecue rub, and away we go. Back on my grill like king of the hill. I've got my grill set up for a 2-zone direct and indirect cooking. One side is preheated to medium-low heat with the opposite side not hot at all. That's the side that I'm gonna be putting my rack of ribs on. We're gonna close this lid, crank the heat to medium, and let this cook for 1 hour. And after 1 hour, our rack of ribs is starting to develop some nice color. You can see that bark starting to develop on those baby back ribs. Woo, this is gonna be fire, y'all. Now, let's go ahead and take each one of these racks of ribs and let's put one each inside of our Williams smoker bag. This bag is gonna help us get that nice mesquite smoked barbecue flavor right on a propane grill. Once it's in the bag, go ahead and crimp the corners to close it on up, and let's add it back to our indirect side. Let's close the lid once more. Crank the heat down to about medium-low, and we're gonna let this go for another hour. After the second hour, let's go ahead and remove our ribs from our smoker bag. Oh, they are looking oh so fire. But like good old JR would say, by God, these ribs ain't done yet. Let's go ahead and hit them with some of that good old JR's barbecue sauce. Let's lather these bad boys up to your heart's content with barbecue sauce. And we're gonna let these cook on low heat for 1 more hour, so we can get a nice sticky coating of barbecue sauce on those ribs. And after 1 final hour, let's go ahead and pull these rack of ribs off the grill. Let's get these inside and on a cutting board to rest. And after these ribs have rested for about 5 minutes, let's go ahead and slice them on up. Slicing into these things, the meat is so tender. After we put it in that smoker bag, it got a chance to reconstitute with all that moisture, and it made it oh so tender. Hit them with a little bit more of that JR's barbecue sauce, and there you have the perfect fall off the bone JR's baby back barbecue ribs. Let me pick one of these bad boys up, let you guys get a look at it. Got a nice little smoke ring on there, even though somebody told me a smoke ring doesn't mean anything. Anyway, like a true carnivore, it's time to get a scoop for Coop, and this week's scoop for Coop is going to be another big ass bite. Man, y'all, if you like tender, juicy, sticky, baby back ribs with a little bit of bark on top to give you that little bit of extra texture you're looking for with your ribs, man, y'all can't go wrong with this JR's baby back barbecue ribs recipe. Let me know how you guys like this one in the comment section. Thank you for rocking with me for another episode of Smell What Coop is Cooking. I'm about to launch into the rest of these ribs. I gotta go.
Hey, there you have it, you guys. Baby back ribs. We hooked these up using good old Jim Ross's recipe. Switched it up a little bit. Added some of that main event mustard. A little bit of that all-purpose seasoning. Let me know how you guys like this one in the comment section. If you guys got any questions, comments, concern, make sure you let me know in the comment section, or you guys can hit me up at smellwhatcoopiscooking@gmail.com. Don't forget to follow me on IG and TikTok at smellwhatcoopiscooking. And don't forget to share with friend or foe, because y'all already know. And we'll catch you right back here next week for another episode of Smell What Coop is Cooking.